Well, my friends, if you are finding yourself feeling any amount of discouraged or hopeless or helpless or distraught today, I just want you to know that this is the fourth time I am sitting down to record this podcast, and all of the reasons I'm re-recording are my own fault because I struggle with technology in a way that no millennial ever should. With that being said, I'm just going to trust that the message was not exactly what it was supposed to be, and I just got to keep doing it again and again until I figure out how to hit record and keep my phone on the charger at the same time, and eventually this podcast will make it to you. Welcome back to the new tribe. Welcome to my little personal corner of the podcast here, where this space, while I am sharing it with you, it is ultimately for me. As you may have noticed already, I talk quite a bit about human design. Side note, I am not an analyst. I've had numerous people reach out to me and they want to understand human design. They want to know what theirs is. If anyone is an analyst and would like to team up so that we can send our listeners over to you, please reach out to me, because as much as I love to follow my one line and dive in and investigate and study and learn, I'm not equipped to read charts for other people. And so I would love to have a resource to send them to. So, with all of that being said, this part of the podcast is a space for me to step further into my experiment. As a self projected projector, I have a verbal authority. All types have different authorities, and as a self projected projector with a verbal authority, I find my direction, my guidance, my path unfolds as I'm hearing the words come out of my mouth. As I'm speaking myself through my process, I find clarity. Some people, Zach, our producer, and my wonderful boyfriend, is a generator. He has a sacral authority, which means in his experiment, he's been learning to connect to that sacral opening and moving towards something that he knows is an affirmative. Like, yes, this is aligned for me because I can feel it in my body, or no, this is not aligned for me because I am retracting from it and pulling away. There are mental authorities, sacral authorities, splenic authorities, emotional authorities, lunar authorities, and verbal authorities. So, as I dive deeper into my experiment, I'm allowing you to come along in this space where I just speak. And I know that it has a tremendous beneficial impact on me. And I hope that there's something here that you can relate to, or perhaps something that I have learned, a tool or resource of my own that I can share with you in this space. But regardless, I appreciate you being here. Today, I want to talk about healing because there's been this tremendous push towards healing as a collective over the last 5 years. I think that that is something that COVID, where people found themselves alone in the quiet with nothing to do for the first time in probably many people's lives, or for a very long time. And a lot of us were forced to just sit with ourselves. And if you know anything about an introspective journey, which we tend to call healing, it starts with getting to know yourself. So I've been amazed at seeing this big movement towards healing, acknowledging our traumas, understanding them, and working through them. But I want to talk today about, like, what is healing? How do we heal? because I think that there is this misconception that I'm going to acknowledge the childhood trauma of my father knocking me around and the sense of fear and lack of safety that instilled in me. And once I acknowledge it in whatever way is necessary, I'm going to be released of the burden of carrying this trauma, and then it will leave me and I will never have to deal with it again. That's not really exactly how it works to some degree, and in some ways, yes, we let go of the tension associated with the experiences that had a traumatic impact on us. However, the version of us that lived through that experience still exists as an infinite being inhabiting the human experience. Everything that we experience will stay with us. In my own journey, coming from a violent, drama-filled, trauma-filled, chaos-fueled childhood, I learned a lot of negative coping mechanisms. The people pleasing, taking care of everyone, going out of my way above and beyond to try and establish a sense of security and love and protection for those around me when it was never asked for, it was never invited, but it was what I was seeking because it was lacking. And as the oldest daughter in the home, that maternal role rested on me in a big way. So I was trying to essentially self-soothe and constantly, like with like building a sandcastle with wet sand, because it's just going to continue to just, water will always find its level. And when there's more water than sand in the sandcastle you're trying to build, it's always just going to flatten to level. And so I was putting this tremendous amount of energy into trying to establish the sense of security for the external world around me, my loved ones, especially my siblings, and then later my children. But what I did not realize was that I had to do that for myself. I had to invite myself into my own process, into my own experience, in order to be able to establish the boundaries that actually did give me security. And within those boundaries, by upholding them within those boundaries, by honoring them, I was showing myself love. And love and security and being protected, overtly protected, was exactly what I needed as a child. And I tried to do that for everyone but myself. So I'm very excited to see a lot of what we are collectively moving towards, this concept of a healing journey, because just like within a family unit, the stronger, the more whole, the more fulfilled, the more secure and loved the individuals within the family are, the stronger the family unit itself is. And the same is true for us as a community, as a society, as a collective at large. The more the more grounded and connected to our sense of self, where we truly receive our love from, the stronger we are as a whole. And there's just an innumerable amount of information out there that we can look at to see the insidious ways that external groups have put into action efforts to sever us from that connection to self, whether it be through just the way that our culture is established, whether it be through the way that our culture is established and how we exist. We today live a more individuated life than ever before. Our ancestors lived in a tribal, village, communal type way because it was necessary for their survival to have designated hunters and growers and medicine makers and the cooks preparing the food. Everyone had a role in a job that supported the whole. And we live in a world today where we really don't have to rely on one another too much so long as we can pay the convenience fees, right? We can outsource our food production. We can outsource educating our children. We can outsource our health. We can outsource all of our material needs for building and our clothing. Like, we really don't have to do anything, which means we don't have to provide anything. So to me, the idea of the new tribe and what I hope to inspire with this space is for us to find ourselves, and through ourselves, we discover the tribe of our people, the people that we can provide something for and also be provided for in the ways that nourish us and nurture us on a more multidimensional level. The tribes of antiquity were established as such because that was how they could survive in the physical world. I am not taking away at all the fact that they had a tremendous amount of spiritual knowledge and awareness and connection, far greater than what we have today, which is also probably why the communal lifestyle was so important to different indigenous peoples all the way around the world. Very, very few cultures lived isolated and separated without being in at least some degree of group. Now, how many people today live alone in their homes? We don't share any of the work, any of the burden, whether it's physical or emotional. We're just getting by on our own. And as I have leaned more and more into my own journey, into my own path, I have been led to the people who share that space with me, the people who belong in my tribe. And unfortunately, I have also had to release people who do not desire the same things that I do of my environment and my external experience. When we existed collectively and tribal living, there were healers, there were spiritual leaders, there were wise people to give us guidance and direction. And in my experience and from what I have seen, I would comfortably say that the vast majority of us are lacking in any sort of guidance or direction. Many of us are recovering from our parents rather than having our parents to look to as we navigate life and parenthood ourselves and aging and just trying to exist in this world that turns upside down every other day, which leads to an even greater sense of isolation. And I think the isolation that we have experienced collectively for the last several decades has been really important because just like what we saw during COVID was when we are forced into a space where there are no alternatives, there's nothing to entertain ourselves, there's nothing to distract ourselves with, we're left truly with just ourselves. And sometimes, some of us intentionally walk into that space. We intentionally isolate, draw in, turn within, and that was something that I did. It began many years ago when my oldest son was 2 years old, was the moment that I realized I have to wipe the slate clean because there are things that are coming out in my life that I have experienced and I have learned, but I do not want to carry them and I do not want to perpetuate them. I do not want to plant these seeds to continue to grow forward in my lineage. Those things can die behind me because I'm not going to nurture certain behaviors and thought processes and mindsets that I could see the detrimental impacts of. So at that point, I said, okay, I've got healing to do. And I went a rather untraditional introspective route where whenever I faced a feeling, I tried to understand it to a certain degree. I tried to develop an awareness and doing so with a very critical sense of honesty. I have always been accused of being brutally honest, which has never been my intention. And it wasn't until I was probably in my mid to late 20s that I realized, oh, people don't actually like the truth. People prefer a lie that makes them comfortable. And when I realized that, I discovered it was like a huge curtain opened in front of me, and it's like, oh my gosh, no wonder I have met such resistance throughout my life when I've just been trying to be clear and concise and honest. Because, from my perspective, as a child growing up in a home with emotionally stunted and undeveloped parents who lacked tools and resources of their own, I witnessed objectively so many encounters where a misunderstanding or a miscommunication very quickly devolved often into violence. And so for myself, I said, I'm absolutely not going to put myself in this situation. I am going to become a very clear communicator. I am going to become very direct. I am going to make sure that I am understood and that we can reach clarity. Whoever it is that I am experiencing conflict with, like, we will find clarity so as to avoid ending up in these situations. And when you, as it turns out, by design, are one to really be geared towards communicating, verbally communicating, let's just put this all on the table. I'm going to say what I need to say. You say what you need to say, and then we'll just figure it out. We'll work it out, and then we can move forward. And I spent so many years just conflicted and confused at why I'm struggling, because my intentions are only to get us into a better place. My intentions are only to establish a connection that we can move forward together through. But it wasn't for a number of years that I realized that most people do not want that level of openness, and they do not want that level of honesty. They do not have that level of honesty with themselves, which is step one. You cannot tell the truth to a person who is lying to themselves. You will always be the villain or the bad guy, because when their energy goes into avoidance and convincing themselves that something is not real or it doesn't exist, whatever the case is, and you come in and you're like, actually, no, this is real, this does exist, and we need to talk about it, then you become the source of the problem. Because if everyone else in the family or the community or the friend group or whatever it is all silently agree to ignore the issue, then you're the only source of the issue when you won't ignore it. So, boy, was that truth bomb shocking for me when I realized people would much, much prefer to be told a pleasant lie than a harsh truth, which I am the complete opposite. I am like, please give me your most honest opinion. And which is why I have found it tremendously difficult, because people, often women in my family, will say, I don't know what you want. I don't know what you want from me, because they're reacting from a space of shrinking and retreating and trying to protect themselves. I don't know what you want me to give you. Whereas I'm just like, please just give me the truth. Whatever is in your mind. Tell me how effed up I am. Tell me how messed up you feel my actions have been, or my intentions have been, or whatever, because we will never find clarity if we don't understand what's happening. You're living inside of your own world, and I'm living inside of my own world, and they clearly don't match. And the only way we can get on the same page and be in the same place is if we communicate it. But I digress. So, step one of healing is you have to get tremendously honest with yourself. And if you cannot find a space to communicate your truth, or what you understand to be the truth, with the other people who are closest, who may be involved, or who may have an impact, you have to, even if you do have that, you first always, always have to get honest with your own truth in yourself, because I guarantee that somewhere in there you also have your own vulnerable part that is retracting and pulling away and trying to protect itself. And only through having the courage to even step onto this path where you become very truthful with yourself do you then begin to navigate inward, where you will find those parts protecting the vulnerability that part is a result of whatever traumatic experience was had. And only through embarking on the journey of healing oneself do we eventually come to discover that there is actually nothing to be healed. As I began to acknowledge the duality of my being, such as I am a human being, I am a physical embodiment, I have this body that needs to be cared for and nourished and exercised and all the things. Like, my body is my pet, right? I have to take care of it. It's the only one I get. And when it gives out, this run is over. But I am also the spiritual being. And FYI, I don't get hung up on the semantics or logistics of what is the spiritual, and does it physically reside in the body, or is it just connected to the egoic mind, the physical awareness? Or that's not really, while I do find that to be a really fascinating point of pondering, it's not really what matters in the end. In the end, what matters is that I am two beings sharing one experience. And my belief is that as a soul, the greater being, the part of me that transcends this earthly realm, the part of me that came into this life to have these experiences in order to further a journey that my physical mind, my physical body, my egoic consciousness has no memory of. I believe that I came into this life with an awareness and acceptance of all of the things that I was going to experience in this physical reality. My soul knew that I was going to come into a home that was volatile and unsafe. My soul knew that the beginning of my life journey was going to demand a tremendous amount of strength and faith and connection, and that whatever experiences I had, I knew I was going to have them. And I had enough faith in my ability to be in those experiences and carry on that I chose to come into this life that I have come into. And the more I began to look at myself as these two symbiotic beings that were sharing this experience in life, the more I began to realize that I could do all of the things that I was faced with. I could do anything that I was faced with. I could face it back. I could overcome it because I chose it for myself. Because when my soul agreed to be born way back in the 80s, as my kids like to remind me, I was born in the 1900s, to be born into the life, into the circumstances, to come to a very young family, a very unprepared set of parents. They had no idea what they were doing. I do like to believe that they were doing the best they could with what they had, given the time they were living in. But I also realize that as much as it is my responsibility in my own life and my own journey and in my own role as a mother to find peace and love for myself and connection between the parts of myself, that they too had that responsibility. And so most of my life, I gave so much grace to the point of denial that they did the best they could and da 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 da. But eventually I came to understand that you get to a point in your life where you're not a kid anymore. You're not a teenager anymore. And really, you're not a young 20-something anymore. At a certain point, you are responsible for the experience that you are having. And you always have the choice to be a victim of the circumstances. And I believe that's where the concept of free will comes in. Because even though my soul knew the things that was going to happen in this life when I stepped into this role, I also have the free will of every single moment to respond to those things however I choose. I can allow myself to be defeated, and I can sit down and I can stay in that one spot for the rest of my life, and I can go into an autopilot passive mode. And my sister said this years ago about our mom, and it just is, she just nailed it. She said that she is a passive participant in her own life. And if that's not true for so many of us, where we just stopped. We stopped trying, we stopped living, we stopped desiring, we stopped expecting, we just stopped. And in that space, we just exist. We go to work, we pay our bills, we get our cheap thrills, we fall into this consumerist lifestyle that falsely gives us a sense of joy or status or anything, but we stopped connecting to ourselves. We rather pretend that the parts of us that are reclusive and vulnerable and scared aren't there. We'd rather pretend that the experience that those parts of ourselves had never happened. And we live in such a deep state of denial that we allow it to damage and diminish the relationships around us. And I am very familiar with that as the black sheep of the family who wants so much to acknowledge the things at hand, because I am a type of person who I have been often referred to being brutally honest. And sometimes people wear that as a badge of honor because when they are given the label of being brutally honest, they lean into the brutal aspect. And they believe that that gives them the license to just be harsh and mean. And I never liked that label on me. I never understood it because for me, the concept of being honest was a survival mechanism. It was a way to diffuse situations and to ensure safety, which, as it turns out, is not very safe when the people you're communicating with are not open to honesty. I now am surrounded by people who value the fact that when they speak with me, they can always trust that I will tell them the truth, the full truth, and that my truth never comes with the intention to harm. My truth only comes from the perspective that I have and a deep respect and reverence for honesty and truth in general. And I absolutely love that when these people who are now in my life are met with my truth and my honesty, they'll let me know if it is unsettling to them. One of my dearest friends, who I met by the grace of God, we were put as roommates together a couple years ago when we went to yoga teacher training. And we remain connected to this day. I think if we go 2 weeks without talking on the phone, we're looking for a sign of life. And she'll open up to me about the trials and things that she's navigating at this point in time. And home ownership is a big one. And I ask her, I say, can we reframe this? And then I share with her the honesty and the truth that I see. And sometimes she's like, I need to sit with that and really feel into how I feel about this. And sometimes she immediately is like, yep, you're dead on. And this is something that I'm avoiding within myself. And how incredibly fulfilling are these relationships where we can build them upon honesty, not from the concept that we're using the truth to hurt, but we're using the truth to shine light and to share light and to build from. So the first step in this process towards healing is becoming lovingly honest with yourself, regardless of how the truth looks, regardless of how it makes you feel. Can you embrace the truth just for what it is? During my time in yoga teacher training, I went through an extremely difficult period, and my girlfriend, brand new friend, roommate, she was an angel put in my path at that time because she was literally the only person on the planet who was there for me. We were all the way around the world in Bali at the time. And she had absolute objectivity towards my experience because we didn't know each other from anything other than that moment. And being in such an open space, my mind was able to retrieve memories. And these memories were that of sexual abuse from my maternal grandfather. as a child. And sparing you all of the gritty details, I first reached out to his former wife, who validated the things I was so confused about at that moment. And then I reached out to my siblings. None of us were particularly surprised because he has a reputation. But as my brother put it felt like a nuke had gone off in our family. And I don't want to go too deeply into all of it, but the important parts are when faced with this truth and this reality, first, my mom chose to avoid. Actually, still to this day, she chooses to avoid. She will not acknowledge that there was ever time or opportunity, even though we all know that there was. She will not acknowledge any of the other people who have also accused him of these exact same experiences. She lives in a state of intense, tremendous denial to the point where I now no longer feel like she is a safe place for myself or my children. Over the last couple of years, I've made efforts to communicate with her, to have conversations with her, but she refuses to acknowledge the validity of anything. And so I can only best assume that in her mind, regardless of the actual proof that exists, her state of denial is so strong and so deep that I am now the villain. And I learned through that experience that she has, in fact, made me the villain in other people's eyes, particularly my siblings and people close to our family, throughout the years. And I think that it was because she knew. And I think that she had to deny me as a person. If she could convince herself and everyone else that I am a difficult, unreasonable, over the top, exaggerates, whatever kind of person, then when eventually this did come to light, she could already be justified in ignoring it. And there's no part of me that was able to deny that once I started to see the way that my siblings also reacted to this news. There was a sense of assumption that I was forcing them to choose between their sister or their mother, which all I had done was put up a boundary. I drew a line and I said, I can no longer be responsible for putting energy into these relationships because I've been building this sandcastle out of wet sand for all of these years. And if you're not going to help me build a structure that we're both safe inside of the container of our relationships, then I can't do it for us. I recognized that my focus needed to become primarily myself and my children, and that my family of origin could no longer be the thing that consumed so much of my emotional energy. That was a truth I had to face. I had to face the part of myself that felt like I was abandoning my siblings because ever since I was a child, it was my assumed responsibility to protect my siblings from the chaos and the violence going on. I always took my younger siblings and we would tuck ourselves away in the farthest corner of the house we could whenever the fighting was happening and things were going on. And I would try my best to distract them and give them something else to focus on, an activity or telling them stories or entertaining them in some way so that they had less awareness of what was happening outside the door. And I had to allow that part of myself, that little girl that was the protector. I had to be honest with her. I had to be honest about her job. It was never her job to begin with. And to allow her to feel safe enough to put it down. That I'm now grown. She's grown up. Those little baby siblings have grown up. And trying to take care of them in the way that I knew best as a child was not the way to take care of them as adults. That part was very difficult for me because I had to face my own feelings of abandonment and navigate the feeling that I was abandoning them. But at no point was I healing. This is why this is my very long-winded way of understanding that healing is not something that we can actually do. There's never anything to heal. The experiences that we're healing from are experiences that our soul knew that we could withstand. My higher self, the part of me that is connected directly to God, knew that I could come into these challenging experiences in this life and I could not only endure them, but I could transmute them and turn them into my power. So long as I did not choose to stop and sit in the victim mentality of it, which is always my free will to do. During this whole time while I was in Bali and these first couple of days, where so much of my own reality was crumbling because as a child, I had built my sense of safety on the foundation of my mother. And because she was never overtly the one causing the turmoil and the chaos, because my father was the one overtly and very obviously bringing all the drama. I understand now that there's so many different dynamics to it, but as a child, I looked at her and if she was okay and if she was safe and calm, I could feel safe and calm. And in that moment, when she chose to not be part of the experience that I was having, and she chose not to offer any loving support or guidance or just connection, anything, my entire sense of security just evaporated. I had no idea anymore what I was supposed to stand on in this world. And I had realized how deeply attached my sense of safety was to my mother, which also made me realize why it was so difficult for me to ever find a sense of security, because I had attached it to a foundation that was more water than sand. And I went through this experience with a faith that I could endure it and I could take all of the difficult feelings that I was experiencing and I was navigating, and I can turn them into my power. And so that is what I did. And I set up boundaries for myself. And the strongest boundary was that if you choose to be part of my life, you have to also want to be part of my life. Not just because we're blood, not just because of the circumstances, but because we both mutually desire a connection and a relationship with one another. And I had to accept that not all of my family was going to understand that, to see that through the same lens that I did, or to have the same desire or interest. But I knew that that was what was going to help me rebuild a foundation of security in this world was that I built it upon people who were genuinely there in my life, part of my life, because they wanted to be, because they love me and they support my efforts to show myself love. So truly, we're never really healing. We're finding deeper, more hidden, tucked away parts of ourselves to show love to. And when we're able to open up and build safe, healthy boundaries for those places and to observe those boundaries, we're able to nurture those parts that had these experiences, whether the experience happened as a child or it happened as an adult. Really, it doesn't matter. There's always the part of us that lived that experience. And because of the non-linear nature of time, everything that has happened is always happening. And everything that will happen is also always happening. So the part of the child in me that experienced living in that home, as well as the 33-year-old woman who was on this trip and undergoing this journey of self, who had that experience abroad, also still exists. There's a part of me that is forever in that little retreat in Bali, just being reborn, dying in that moment and in the next moment and in the next moment, until the parts that needed to be left were left, and the parts that needed to be loved were loved. But the reality is that we don't live on a timeline, beginning, middle, end. We live in a multidimensional reality as multidimensional beings. And that's why your heart and your emotions and your memories can go right back to this place in the past. That's why a smell can take you back, in a song or a sound. After I had my pulmonary embolism, which will be a whole different conversation another day, it was in early September. And it wasn't until the 1-year anniversary that I realized how much emotional burden I carried from that experience, until I saw that golden fall light again. And it was right around the anniversary, and the cycle of nature took me right back to that moment. And in returning to that experience, through connecting to the part of me that will always live in the moment that I woke up and knew something was wrong, I was able to reconnect to all of the feelings that that part of me had, and then give love and support to that part of me and the child that I was, and every other version of ourselves that have been through difficult times exist always. And when we deny them, we shove them deeper into the recesses of our self, our psyche, our body. And they live on and they fester, and sometimes they manifest as disease. I had that experience through carrying childhood trauma that became the sexual abuse trauma, became chronic reproductive issues, which then eventually led to a hysterectomy, which then eventually led to pulmonary embolism, which I credit really as like my moment of reckoning, or my awakening, if you will. And that was about 5 years ago. And what I can share with you today, unequivocally, is that none of the parts of myself from the past or from the future need to be healed. None of who I am needs healing and repairing or fixing. All of my parts need love and support and nurturing and security. And I would bet that that is the same for all of us. If you're seeking healing, I invite you to take a moment, take a break from trying to fix yourself and seek love. Ask yourself, what does it mean to me to be loved? When I started to view myself through my duality, through being a spiritual being and a physical being, I started to have a conversation from both aspects of myself. And I said, what does it take for you to feel love? What does it take for Megan, the physical being that's here presently, to feel love? And what does it take for the spiritual higher self to feel loved? And went deeply into this journey of what does it even mean to love myself? How do I love myself? And because I was able to view myself as two separate aspects of a being, I started to imagine, if I am my own friend, how do I show love to my friends? How do I show love to my family, to my children, to the people that I care about? And then I just started giving myself those things. One of the biggest things, which, coming back to my human design, once I learned that, I realized why it was such a foundational thing for me, is that loving myself looks like giving myself grace and space to rest, taking off the pressure of productivity, taking off the pressure of expectation that I need to do more and I need to do more and I'm never doing enough, but allowing myself to do what I'm capable of doing. And in that space, I found when I allow myself rest, I'm able to accomplish all the things that I do need to accomplish, because I do still exist in real life and we have to do things. What I found was I was able to accomplish them much more efficiently, much more joyfully, and I ended up in a place of much more fulfillment rather than the resentment that I felt towards myself when I was putting pressure on, you may not stop or rest until you accomplish blah, 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 blah. But without allowing myself space to rest, I was bogged down and I was moving slower and I was making more mistakes and just kind of creating this negative snowball effect for myself. And going back to my human design, that was reflected in my projector nature, that we just need a lot of rest. And so I had discovered that love for me from myself looks like giving myself the space to value and prioritize my rest, which has then translated into my relationships, where I am now able to teach the people around me that I receive love by being given the space to rest. This is how I love myself. This is what love looks like to me. And when my kids are like, hey, mom, I'll cook dinner tonight. Hey, mom, I got this. Don't worry. You look tired. Why don't you rest? Because they now are capable of acknowledging it in not only me, but also in themselves. In my relationship, I can say, I'm going to excuse myself from this activity or this event or whatever because I just need rest. And that is an established boundary for me. And so I'm able to really show myself a lot of love, and I give others the opportunity to show me love in a way that is very, very fulfilling and nurturing to me because I understand it about myself. And there's tons of other ways, but that's one of the biggest ones for me. I had to just remind myself when I first was moving through that uncomfortable space of like, I need to be doing, and looking around at all the things I needed to be doing. I said, no, I need to rest. I need to allow myself to rest and sleep, do whatever, and I'm not going to mentally and verbally beat myself up over it. This is what is correct for me. So if you are on a path of healing, I invite you to take a break from healing and take a moment and tap into, how do I love myself? What does it look like to love myself? And because I've already recorded this episode once, thanks to my technical illiteracy, I can't remember if I shared the story in the first episode that doesn't exist or if it was earlier in this one. So I'm going to share it again. When I was a kid, when I was about 8 years old, I was taking out the garbage. And being an 8-year-old girl, I was probably about the height of the big, tall garbage cans that are outside in the alley. And my cat had broken a dish. And so I go outside and I take the bag over my shoulder to sling it over my shoulder into the can. And when I did that, the broken plate sliced the back of my thigh open. And that was a physically traumatic experience because it incurred trauma on my body. Coming from the home that I came from, we didn't often have medical insurance, so a hospital visit was out of the question. And this was before the days of urgent care clinics all over the place. So my mom took a maxi pad, slapped it on the back of my leg, taped it up, and that was that. And because this gash was rather deep and there was nothing sealing it shut, it just kept, I'm a kid and I'm constantly doing things and moving and not, taking care of this wound properly. It healed with a really raised, a big amount of scar tissue. It's very noticeable. Over the years, obviously, it's been many years now and it's lighter, but for most of my life, it was a dark purple gash across the back of my thigh. And I share this story because oftentimes our wounds are not properly healed. They're not given the proper treatment and care that is necessary in order for them to heal well to the best of their ability. Oftentimes, especially when it comes to an emotional or a psychological trauma and wound, more often than not, most of the time, we like to just go into denial and avoidance, and we slap a maxi pad over it and just pretend that it doesn't exist anymore. And there's no possibility of this injury healing properly without it being nurtured properly. Today, pushing 30 years later, I could go to a surgeon and have them remove the scar tissue and stitch it up properly and create a very small, seamless scar, which could have been done originally. Or I can accept this part of my body and my life experience with love, and I can nurture this scar in the best way that I can by nourishing it with oils that help repair the skin, by massaging it and breaking up the scar tissue and the fascia and releasing some of the tension in it and bringing movement and circulation back to that space. That doesn't erase the scar. It doesn't erase the experience. And it doesn't erase the negligible response that I received. But what it does do is I am now my caregiver. I am now my nurturer. And I have the ability to give myself what I should have had. It doesn't make those things go away, it doesn't replace them, but it allows me to meet this reminder of a difficult childhood with love and compassion that I now have the ability to give myself. So, friends, I hope that you can spend this next week or two connecting with yourself and picking at least one thing that you value. How do you love yourself? What is important for you to receive as love? And what parts of yourself can you give those things to? Okay, thanks for sticking with me through all of this and my technical difficulties and my coughing, which you probably didn't notice too much because Zach is a fantastic editing whiz. And so hopefully it didn't interfere with the recording too terribly much. But until next time, thank you. And as always, go with love.